This episode of What's Going On with Shipping. The U.S. saw the supply chain crisis coming in 2015. Hi, I'm your host, Sal Mercagliano. I'm the chair of the Department of History, Criminal Justice, and Political Science at Campbell University in North Carolina, former merchant mariner and instructor in maritime industry policy at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. Okay, buckle up. We're heading back to 2015. All right, well, I get the flux capacitor up to speed so we can hop in the DeLorean, hit 88 miles an hour, and head to 2015, which is the exact year, by the way, that Marty and Doc did go to. In 2015, the Federal Maritime Commission released a report, and that report is amazing. I got to say, I found it recently and have been going through it. And the fact that they identified almost nearly every issue we're facing today, 6 years past that report, is absolutely just, spot on. They did a report whereby they interviewed and met with all the major players. They met with the major participants. They sat down with Gene Soroka at LA, Mario Cordero from Long Beach, and all the players in all these other ports around the United States, shippers, cargo carriers, you name it. It's an impressive list. And what they put together was a report entitled U.S. Container Port Congestion and Related International Supply Chain Issues, Causes, Consequences, and Challenges. And I want to take a look at that report because I think it's pretty insightful. So I've been trolling around the FMC website because that's what I do. And while doing that, they've had a series of hearings going on and data on the supply chain. And I came across a series of studies that they've done. And this is the one that piqued me right here. U.S. port congestion and related international supply chain issues, causes, consequences, and challenges. When you come here, you come to this report right here. And this report is just, can I say again, just an impressive document. I have to say it. And I know I give the FMC a lot of crap, and I can say that because I have. But hats off to them for this report. So they set out here, and if you look at the table of contents right here, you just get it. What they're doing, they do an assessment of global trade in 2015. They look at the industry conditions and trends. They look at federal government interest in port performance and port-related infrastructure. They talk about these forums they had, and they had a series of these forums, which will go up to. They talk about the follow-up efforts and the organization of the report. But what they look at are key topics. And if you look at these topics, this is a list of what is going on today in the supply chain. Capital investment and planning. Have we invested in the infrastructure of the ports and the entire structure? Chassis availability and related issues. Holy cow. If you talk truckers, the whole issue here is chassis. Vessel and terminal operations, port drayage and truck turn time, extended hours, PierPASS, just issues we're dealing with right now. Congestion pricing, collaboration and communication. And if you keep going here, other issues they list: detention, demurrage, class 1 railroads, federal partners in U.S. international supply chains, congestion costs, and port supply, port congestion diagnostics, and identified by FMC forum participants. I have to say, this is literally the issues that are happening right now in 2021 in the U.S. supply chain. And the FMC has this report from 2015 that identify them 6 years ago. So I want to just highlight a couple of passages in here of this report. I'm obviously not going to go through it, but I'll have the entire link in the show notes so that you can. But this one right here in the introduction: maintaining the efficiency and effectiveness of America's global supply chains is exceptionally important to the nation's continued economic vitality. Unfortunately, congestion at ports and other points in the nation's intermodal system has become a serious risk factor to the relatively robust growth of the American economy and its competitive position in the world economy. Participating at the FMC Port Forum held in Baltimore, former FMC chairman Helen Bentley, who was a congresswoman from Maryland, pointed out that the primary responsibility of the FMC, ever since the liner shipping statutes were first enacted in 1916 and recodified in the Merchant Marine Act of 1920, which is the Jones Act, is to oversee the ocean commerce of the United States. The key to that commerce, in her view, is the nation's ports. She urged her fellow participants as they began examining conditions in our ports and the challenges they face to keep in mind that the search for solutions presents a golden opportunity for those connected with the ports and the intermodal system that support the U.S. international supply chain to work together to develop a shared vision of the transformation of the U.S. ports. This report goes on to highlight one of the reasons why we find ourselves in this situation. As recently as 2006, the industry's biggest concern was how it and the nation were going to deal with infrastructure issues when cargo volumes were steaming ahead at double-digit growth rates throughout the period from 1980 to 2006. An annual rate of growth in global liner cargo of 10% was the norm. Then came the Great Recession, and the issues being faced in 2006 went into hiding but did not disappear. However, by 2009, it became clear that the industry was not going to see the return of double-digit growth anytime soon. And that's important because from 2009 up until 2015, 2016, and until very recently, you saw single-digit growth, which could be accommodated with very little attention to details. But now with double-digit growth, with growth we're seeing right now, or really the resumption of double-digit growth, that is where we're running into problems in the global supply chain. Also find this part very indicative. Although the U.S. port industry has entered a period of lower growth, Drury Maritime Advisors identified North America as a region where demand growth still is likely to outpace terminal capacity. The region's inability or unwillingness to provide additional capacity could be attributed to some industry trends now unfolding: the rapid explosion of ship size in the Asia-Europe trade that causes the cascading of large vessels out of that trade into other trades, including the U.S., formation of new and larger alliances, continuation of poor financial performances by ocean carriers, lack of public funding, rising terminal valuations, and terminal productivity that has been slowed to improve. Until 2011, the top 3 global carriers had sufficient volume to operate outside of formal alliance structures. That is no longer the case. The formation of new or larger alliances since 2011 has complicated the operational factors that ports and ocean carriers must deal with and has intensified competitive pressure. For example, mega-sized vessels require mega-sized gantry cranes and more of them in order to turn around these very large vessels in a reasonable amount of time. We just saw the Costco shipping Aquarius, a ULCV, an ultra-large container vessel, come in back in October, and it's in Long Beach right now offloading. Another operation tension is that load ports in Asia, it may be more efficient operationally to load containers from a particular destination port in a few adjacent bays of the ship, but a discharge port, a more dispersed loading pattern may allow more gantry cranes to work a ship at any one time. And it goes on here. I'm not going to read all of this. So to get the feel about this, and this is one of the things the FMC does great, they gather information. They are fantastic at data gathering. And this is what we see. They had these port forums. They went out to all these different ports and had it. They were in LA Long Beach. They were in Baltimore. They were in New Orleans. They went to all these major ports, got everybody together and put them into a hearing. I think there were 4 separate forums that they did where they were able to get everybody together and listen to them. And again, there's an appendix, which I'll include here, that includes everybody who participated. It was just an amazing encapsulation of the who's who of the U.S. shipping industry at the time. So what they got from the venues was basically 6 major themes that are involved, and I talked about them in the table of contents: investment and planning, chassis availability, vessel and terminal ops, port drayage and truck turnaround, extended gate hours, PierPASS, congestion pricing, and collaboration and communication. Although there were other issues that are mentioned, things like the Class 1 railway system. So the historian in me loves it when you go back, find a historical document, and it adequately or just kind of gets the future perfectly. And this statement right here is one of them. One view of the U.S. container port congestion crisis is that it resulted from events that have developed or emerged over a considerable period of time and from within the system itself, rather than being the result of external shocks, such as an unanticipated surges in container volumes or management labor issues. According to this view, methods and practices developed and applied perhaps decades ago in quite different circumstances have morphed into today's problems. So that's perfectly true. But it also has this idea that, listen, there may be an external shock that the system cannot handle. Regardless of the merits of this viewpoint, many seem to think is inevitable. that embracing business as usual will lead to significant further declines in the performance of U.S. intermodal transportation system and degrade supply chain efficiency. And that is exactly true. It was already stressing and having issues prior to this. But when you add this unanticipated surge, COVID, and now all of a sudden the system breaks. So if I'm going to have an issue with this report, and I do, it's me. Yeah, I mean, come on, I'm going to have an issue with something here. Is this aspect right here? One view the FMC is considering that could help the industry to look for and craft suitable solutions to major issues affecting the U.S. intermodal supply chain is by establishing a national level federal advisory committee to help facilitate discussion and resolution of issues of national importance that are affecting or promise to affect the U.S. intermodal system. Okay. Missing from this entire report and in the hearings and everything else is the Maritime Administration. The U.S. Maritime Administration is designed to promote U.S. maritime trade. It's designed to promote the U.S. merchant marine and the ports, the infrastructure, you name it. This report should have been handed over to the Maritime Administration for their enactment, their enforcement, for action of some kind. And this is the big break in the U.S. maritime issues regarding the government. FMC is a regulatory independent commission. They have no jurisdiction, oversight to legislate anything. Yet here they are, they gather this great information together. They find out all the issues, yet they are really hamstrung in what they can do to enforce this. At the same time, the Maritime Administration, which is basically hands-off international trade, is not even involved in this. And, you know, when we broke the FMC out of the old Maritime Administration, 1961, there was a readjustment. The Federal Maritime Commission used to be the Federal Maritime Board within the Maritime Administration. And we used to have an Assistant Secretary of Transportation that basically was the Maritime Minister, so to speak. It had level approach, but now the Maritime Administrator, the FMC are two separate entities. They don't really talk very well together. They don't operate well together. And therefore, we are missing a one-stop shop for Congress and congressional people to go to get information. We're seeing that right now with the hearings being done in the Senate Commerce Committee. I just watched a hearing yesterday with the World Shipping Council going on. We're seeing hearings with the FMC going on. And yet nowhere is the Maritime Administration in any of this. So I just want to highlight one or two of these sections and just talk about it. So they follow a very kind of formulaic process. They will have a section that frames the issue, a good overview of the situation in 2015, which is basically exactly what the situation is today in some ways. They'll look at all the issues taking us up to 2015. And then they have a cross section of stakeholders' viewpoints. These are from the port forums where they basically summarize what are the major issues at play from all the stakeholders there. And then they have this section on stakeholder suggestion and proposed fixes. And so, for example, this is capital investment right here. You know, explore the potential of using public-private partnerships as a financing and procurement tool. Parts in their supply chain partners should take advantage of the fact that the nation is in the process of developing a national freight strategic plan. And again, you see this throughout this report of them using this. When you get in the chassis availability, for example, same formulaic process right here, but then you come to the issues of what needs to be done. And again, you know, implement more gray pools to expand chassis interoperability. Attention was drawn to the Gulf region as not being served by a single gray chassis pool. Inbound container volumes forecasting should be improved to allow daily chassis supply at terminals to be planned and prepared more effectively. I mean, this is literally the issue going in and out of the port of LA and Long Beach. You talk to any trucker, you talk to the warehouse guys, it's chassis. There's not enough chassis. There's a 15 to 18% of all chassis in Southern California are being used for storage right now to store empty and loaded containers. They're not being used very effectively. And you saw that in here. Vessel and terminal port operations, again, they follow away with this, move away from random access to container yards to a more planned truck arrival system. Hello. That is something we're talking about right now. Traditional truck appointment systems. I mean, everything that is going on right now was foreseen in 2015. And yet, due to the lack of any government agency that can oversee, direct. Again, I don't want the government involved. I keep getting dinged by one person who tells me that I am, I want government in charge. I want socialism. And if you listen to the World Shipping Council talk about it, they don't want any government involvement. And why would they? They're making record profits. Again, they're making twice as much in 10 months this year than they've made in 10 years. So why would you want any government involvement? And the reason you want government involvement is to prevent this from happening in a way. If there had been better coordination, if the stakeholders been brought together, again, there's no incentive right now for the container companies to do this. Matter of fact, the 2015 report identifies the fact that, listen, container companies were divesting themselves of chassis. If you go back to the original creation of containerism, I did a book on the military sea lift during the Vietnam War, and the thing that saved the US in Vietnam, logistically, not fighting the VC and the Vietnamese, which is a whole separate issue, but logistically, was the introduction of Sealand. Malcolm McLean and Sealand came in, and the contract with Sealand was not just to bring container ships into Cam Ranh Bay and Da Nang. It was a intermodal system. They operated trucks and chassis to move the containers out of the port 25 miles to logistics bases. That was the concept of containerization. That was the concept of intermodalism. It was trucks, it was containers, it was chassis, it was ships. That was the idea. But the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, companies had to bleed money. And so one of the things they got rid of were their chassis, they got rid of their terminals, they got rid of a lot of things. And what we're seeing right now is with record profits is whether or not these companies take this fruition. I just want to compliment the FMC on this report. It's an amazing piece of work. It really is. The issue I have with it, and this is not with the FMC, this is beyond the FMC control, is there was no way to implement these changes, even though they foresaw what was coming 6 years in the future. They didn't see COVID, but they saw the issues on the horizon. Unfortunately, here's a report that tells us basically this is what's looming on the horizon, and we failed to act on it. And I think that's on us to a certain extent too, that we did not do this. We've benefited from the deregulation of the container shipping industry. The Shipping Act of 1984, the Ocean Reform Act of 1998, basically created low transportation costs. I mean, we've created an entire economy based on almost invisible shipping costs going across the oceans. And this has moved industry overseas and moved manufacturing overseas. But understand too that it's reciprocal too. A lot of those countries, China, for example, imports a great deal of material to be able to do what they do, even finished parts to put into larger finished parts. And so this entire system has been developed. But here you see the shipping, you see the Federal Maritime Commission with really a warning shout. And unfortunately, it was not heeded. So hope you enjoyed this look back in the past, our little trip back to 2015. If you did, please subscribe, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos when they come out. Give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, and if you can, share this across social media. Let other people know about what's going on with shipping. And if you have a few extra dollars you're feeling in the holiday spirit, then contribute to our Patreon page. And this allows me to continue this work, especially when I'll be teaching over break and over summer. It helps me maintain this channel. So until our next video, Sal, signing off.